everyone, my name is Isabella Peretti, and welcome to the October 9th, 2014 edition of Champion Briefs News. We'll target all the important things that have transpired in the past 7 days, both international and domestic. So let's get started first with international, with the Brazilian election. The PSDB party's candidate, Aécio Neves, is going to face off against the Workers' Party candidate, Dilma Rousseff, and current presidential incumbent in Brazil. Unfortunately, the election that occurred at the end of September was not effective in providing a victor, but instead allowed for a runoff election to take place once again between Mr. Neves and Ms. Rousseff. The two have vastly different parties. The Freedom House organization has called the PSDB party, or the Brazilian Socialist Democracy Party, to be more center-right, but many political analysts in Brazil call it more center-left. Regardless of this discord in overall idea, one thing they can agree on is that it tends to be more centrist in nature, more moderate, which is starkly different than that of Dilma Rousseff's own Workers' Party that is definitely far off to the left, and has been in power for the past 3 presidential cycles. Her predecessor, Luiz Lula da Silva, did wonders in mitigating many problems with regard to poverty and lack of economic growth, and instead bolstered the reputation of Brazil as an economic powerhouse not only in the region, but in the world. Unfortunately, we're seeing a now downturn of that, as Dilma Rousseff's Brazil, at least economically, is suffering. And only one statistic to exemplify this is provided by the Wall Street Journal on October 7th of 2014, indicating that Brazil has the highest consumer inflation rate in the past 3 years. They met this in September, this past month, at 6.75%. which not only is deleterious for overall trade, but is definitely driving down consumer confidence in the entire Brazil. Reuters indicates, though, on October 8th of 2014, that certainly one of the most, if not the most important issue of this election will be the economy, and there is a difference in the way that the two are handling it. While Mr. Neves pretty consistently goes to more of the tertiary structure of not only education, but of socioeconomic structure in order to create the most amount of economic success, Dilma Rousseff has always touted that of bringing the entire population together to yield the success that we also seek. And essentially what this means is that Mr. Neves is targeting more of direct and foreign portfolio investment, and that of the top of those biggest businesses and corporations in Brazil to garner the most revenue. But for Ms. Rousseff, she's definitely looking more towards those social safety nets, the growth of smaller programs in order to enable economic growth, and has stated time and time again that people win elections, investors don't win elections. Now, as that same Reuters article furthered, we're seeing polling at around 41% for Ms. Rousseff and 33% for Mr. Neves, but seeing as the runoff election is taking place on October 26th of 2014, there is still a lot of time for people to make up their mind, especially that big chunk of those who have not made up their mind, those who are not in the polling numbers, because they voted for the third-party candidate in the initial presidential election. So it'll be curious to see what happens, which is especially important to follow closely in the next couple of weeks. But for this weekend, for upcoming tournaments, we have to ask, what are Rousseff's chances? Outside of simply that of polling data alone, what chance does she have to continue in her idea of Brazil, to continue in the legacy of her predecessor, and most importantly, to continue in the programs that she hasn't quite finished yet? Furthermore, we have to look at the opposition in between Mr. Neves' Brazil versus Ms. Rousseff's Brazil. Now, Neves explains a lot of things differently than Ms. Rousseff does, and certainly has different ideologies politically, but also in the way that he intends to make change in Brazil. But will that result in actual change if he is elected? It's very easy to continue many of the programs that Ms. Rousseff has set up. The foundation is already there, but seeing as that he's already really a centrist, is there going to be a stark difference between his Brazil and the one that we're finding in the status quo? And then, again, what is the difference if Ms. Rousseff is indeed elected? Will she change some of the failed policies, and will she make a bigger push to grow the Brazilian economy? Alright, now let's move on to the topic of Ebola. I had the privilege of attending a University of Florida panel on Ebola on October 8th of 2014, just yesterday, and it was very enlightening. Some things that I learned that I'd love to impart upon all of you is first that the Ebola virus is one that began with fruit bats, then was transferred to primates, then primary human infection, and secondary human infection. There are 5 different strains of the Ebola virus. The one that is widespread now is the Zaire strain. Now, this same strain is the one that has taken place since 1976 with the inception of the Ebola virus and has not been significantly biologically mutated, so if dealt with accordingly, it shouldn't be too terrible to eradicate in the region. In December of 2013, 3 nations were sucked into the Ebola epidemic, and they were Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea.